Now, my pleasure to introduce our next Ed Talk. And David Adkins, during his 12 years as a state legislator in Kansas, did some amazing work as a champion for public education. David was a state senator at a time when I was working for both the opposite side of the party, if you will, in Kansas, and also for the governor. And David and I had an opportunity to show what collaboration really was in many ways. Today, David serves as the 9th CEO on the Council of State Governments. David, as a peer organization to ECS, works with state leaders from across the country and from all branches of government. And he does this to help them achieve excellence in governing while advancing the common good. The Council of State Governments, at both the regional and national levels, has an ongoing commitment to help state lawmakers understand the complexities and address the challenges in public education. CSG has produced groundbreaking research over the years on school discipline policies and worked to reform systems that fail children and their families. David is here with us today to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act, the value of collaboration, and the opportunities that may be in your states. Please join me in welcoming David Adkins to the stage.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. That was an introduction that actually makes me wish I had prepared something. But very generous. I'm working on a theory, though. Jeremy's first presentation to kick off this conference was really impressive. Don't you all agree? I mean, that was pretty incredible. There's no teleprompter. I just have to believe he's a cyborg. So I don't know what his battery life is, but let's just test that over the next 3 days. See if you can see him plugging in anywhere to recharge. But his leadership at ECS has made a tremendous difference. ECS is not only thriving, but growing, and as a convener, seen as a respected, nonpartisan, objective place where policymakers can come together, convene and collaborate towards solutions that matter. So to everyone on the staff of the Education Commission of the States, thank you for all you've done to bring all of these people together. Your life's work is making a difference for people who make a difference, and thank you for that. We also have a few legislators I know that are here, but I'm going to ask them to stand, having been a former legislator. If you're an elected official in one of the legislatures of our state, and I simply want to say these are people who are citizen legislators, giving their time to be here, many in an election year, and I just want to say thank you for your leadership. Thank you for recognizing you don't know it all, but have things to learn from others, and also stories of success to share. That makes a big difference. Well, every time you talk about education, it seems personal, and these Ed Talks are a little bit difficult. Having been a lawyer and a higher education administrator and a legislator, to speak within the confines of 20 minutes is very unnerving to have that kind of limitation. If any of you have watched TED Talks, I see quite a few freakishly nerdy people here in this room, and my guess is, like me, when I have insomnia, I often will just pull up random TED Talks. And inevitably, at the end of a TED Talk, I have a certain, just reveling in the knowledge that I've just had light bulbs go off, but ultimately introspection and self-doubt. I can't help but think after I've listened to a TED Talk, what an idiot I am, because these people seem so much smarter. The difference between a TED Talk and an Ed Talk is that after a TED Talk, I think I'm an idiot. After this Ed Talk, you'll think I'm an idiot. So that's kind of the parameters we're working on here. 20 minutes, you know, it's one of those things I talked to my wife as I was preparing for this, and I said, you know, I've only got 20 minutes, and I've got to give them a wow factor. She said, you've never spent 20 minutes trying to give me a wow factor in your life. So I'm not sure she knew exactly what I was talking about, and I really didn't want to get into it with her. So I've already set expectations pretty low, I think. So let's just work from there. Every journey in education seems personal. The fact that we've all had teachers that made a difference in our lives. I don't know about you, but every September when I walk into a Target or a Walmart and I can smell the erasers, I can smell the paste. I'm not quite sure why they still sell that paste. There may be people just still snacking on it, but the smell of school supplies is just one of those touchstones for me. And in fact, the teachers that made a difference in my life are certainly also that. This is a picture of the Lower Fox Creek School in the heart of the Flint Hills in Kansas. It's where my grandmother, Nellie, went to school, a one-room school that at that time would have been quite a walk to get to, but no doubt reflected the commitment of that community to make an investment in its future. And recognizing that limited resources were there, but a commitment to the future, they made this kind of education possible. My grandmother, Nellie, probably didn't travel 200 miles from her home in the course of her life. She never had a smartphone. Smartphone for her was a party line that when I was a small child, I could not help but listen in to the other people's conversation, only to be found out by her and told that that was an absolute non-starter. High tech for her was cooking on a wood stove and knowing that it was time to cook the bread when you could open the door, put your arm in the stove, and you knew that the temperature was right. Now, by comparison, my daughter, named after her, Nell, has been in 8 countries this month. A remarkable kind of progression. She's not a drug mule. She's actually had the opportunity to visit countries behind the Iron Curtain. Yesterday, she was at Cambridge in England on a city exchange program, giving her the opportunity, as she texted me in real time last night, thinking that we could send messages across the Atlantic instantaneously, but that she had walked by the laboratories at Cambridge where Watson and Crick had discovered the double helix, a DNA molecule. It's remarkable to think how far we've come since my grandmother Nellie attended that one-room schoolhouse to the way in which my daughter Nell looks at the world as her learning laboratory. For me, growing up, this was Google. But I lived in a home with a lot of books. My mother was trained to be a teacher, and in fact, in the same county where that one-room schoolhouse exists, she taught high school. Now, in those days, as a teacher, if you wanted to smoke, and this was before we knew smoking was bad for you, you actually had to leave the city limits in order to smoke. That was sort of the paternalistic attitude that those in charge of schools had towards educators. Not much creativity was allowed. You were expected to do as you were told, and that included a 24/7 lifestyle adjustment. So in thinking about my presentation today, I actually went to Google. That's what we all do, right, when we need to prepare something. And I thought, well, it'd be easy just to, let's Google innovations in education. And within just a few split seconds, we got 117 million responses, which in the matter of 20 minutes is going to be a challenge to review all of them. But let's get started. It does tell you that in this field, as you think about the course of the next several days of this particular conference, there is an amazing amount of insight, knowledge, good practices that have been identified, actually failures and results that can be had. And thankfully, the robust program that has been set up for you allows you to encounter the challenges and the opportunities that confront policymakers in shaping the future. When I think about all of these opportunities and my child, I can't help but think how much teachers make a difference. And I can tell you that the greatest interest for me in being here today was to be able to interact with the Teachers of the Year, the National Teachers of the Year from each state. What a remarkable honor. And I'm here today, I'm able to pursue my livelihood because there were Teachers of the Year in my life. Miss May, Miss Ward, Miss Schmidt, Mrs. Swinson, Mrs. Hogan, Mr. Manzoni, Mrs. Nelson, Mr. Powell. Those were the people that gave me my start in life, public school educators who cared. And as a result of their engagement with me as a young person, and a community that cared through Boy Scouts and PTA engagement, opportunities for enrichment, My life is what it is today. And I know that those that are here that are Teachers of the Year value the profession. We honor you. Most of you can be seen and identified by the fact you're wearing comfortable shoes, thinking you may need to stand on your feet all day, and often carrying a large bag to be able to steal anything that looks like it might be useful in your classroom next year. It's the mark of a great educator. You're also the ones that are picking up the bottles of water here in the concessions in the hotel and saying, there's no damn way I'm going to pay $4 for a bottle of water. So you can tell those educators, but the skills you bring to this conference, I hope you're willing to share liberally, because it is your perspectives that make a difference. So let me turn now to the topic that in so many ways will shape this conference and also shape the choices that you'll be making soon. Now, in recent history, it's really relatively recent history, that the federal government's involvement in education has been significant. In the 1960s was the first time that the federal government under Lyndon Johnson decided to become much more active in what traditionally had been the prerogative of the states and localities. Since that time, significant investments in K through 12 and post-secondary education have grown. This has created challenges and opportunities. Challenges in that it tests the very notion of federalism, that education has primarily been a prerogative of the states, and that the laboratories of democracy represented by the states are more than able to shape expectations and fund programs commensurate with the expectations of the citizens and the needs of the students of that state. But there are certain challenges that a nationalized approach needed to address. Many of those focused on equity. Well, as you know, any TED Talk usually has some kind of profound question. Well, this Ed Talk, I would want to take more of a global approach, other than focusing on the technicalities of ESSA, which in many instances in the concurrent sessions you'll have a chance to dig into. But I really think as we think about what is the future of education, we have to ask ourselves, what is the definition of a meaningful life? Is it the attainment of wisdom? Is it the practice of loving kindness? Well, Thomas Jefferson believed that a meaningful life was inextricably linked to those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We could argue that educators are, in fact, among the most eloquent and dedicated patriots, in that what you do in your course of your daily life is to empower students to take full advantage of those inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the absence of those rights, freedom is not available, accessible, or frankly, even something somebody can dream to pursue. And yet Thomas Jefferson also, in The Birthright of Our Nation, said that all men are created equal. A slaveholder who made that pronouncement, and with successive generations of evolution, we have redefined the birthright, recognizing that for far too long, it was possible in a nation who was born with the premise that all people are created equal, for one person to own another. The vestiges of that pernicious practice continue to influence every institution of civil life today. Plessy v. Ferguson allowed the Supreme Court to say that separate was equal when it came time to educate students based on the color of their skin. In Brown versus Board of Education, a ruling that occurred just in my mother's lifetime, the court held that separate could never be equal. And today, we continue in the quest that's outlined in the purpose of our Constitution to form a more perfect union. We have to grapple with those two competing interests of how do we inspire freedom and empower students to take full advantage of their potential, to embrace life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to have a successful, meaningful life. And on the other hand, how do we as a nation, through our civic institutions and primarily our school, advance that notion that all people are created equal? And this is where the federal government has placed its involvement. And ESSA is truly a compromise between two competing interests. One, that states should be left to do education and the federal government should get out. The other, that states left to their own devices will leave students behind, and that accountability must be imposed from Washington if we wish to address those inequities. And I believe that the compromise that ESSA developed is a very promising one. The fact that it's a compromise means that neither side got everything they wanted. But the fact that No Child Left Behind had not been reauthorized since 2007, allowed to expire, and that states and educational planners were left uncertain about what the future of educational funding would be, that states were required to compete in race to the top with no sense that funding would be guaranteed or sustainable. At least we now have an act that I think makes some significant remedies to the previous system. One is that under the No Child Left Behind, testing and teacher accountability had a very punitive a gloss to it. I think it's one of the reasons why people going into the teaching profession have dropped so considerably. In fact, we need to find ways to value and reward teachers. And the testing and accountability measures under No Child Left Behind, frankly, left a lot of teachers behind. As the Lieutenant Governor from Iowa is here, as anybody in Iowa can tell you, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. And in fact, far too often, we used testing as a way to think we were doing accountability, when in fact what we were doing is not advancing educational outcomes. Now, we also recognize that far too often the Department of Education was involved in simply compliance monitoring. Check off all the boxes, submit the paperwork, and we'll get back to you on the circumstances and conditions under which you can receive federal funds. I believe we're moving into, at least on paper, the goals that have been stated, a more enlightened era. And the enlightenment of that era is focused on, as the ECS report said, a well-rounded student's education, looking at the holistic approach to education of a child, and recognizing that a student-centered, teacher-led school produces the greatest chances for success. So collaboration will be a challenge. And the new groups that have been brought together, the stakeholders that are required to be at the table, will present tremendous opportunities. We have to recognize that digitalization and globalization are trends that are and have shaped our world. And the acceleration of those trends is something that we continue to be challenged by. Our politics is filled with nationalistic, xenophobic tendencies because the temptation is to blame the other. When we see others as less than human, we devalue the pursuit of the common good because we fail to recognize our own self-interest in making sure everyone is at the table, engaged, and committed. And we fail to define our own self-interest when we fail to recognize that any potential of anyone that is not fulfilled is potential we do not have the ability to benefit from. And so I think in the retooling, the new perspective, the reframing, we have the opportunity to recognize that we simply can't lie to people anymore about the effects of globalization. There are jobs that are gone and they are not coming back. The challenge is to prepare students for the real world that exists in a digitalized, globalized world. Now, yes, there are challenges that have to be addressed in this new world. The fact that 67 people have wealth equal to the bottom half of all people in the world, it means that there are tremendous inequities in resource allocation that have been spawned and exacerbated by globalization. But the fact of the matter is, globalization is here, and it requires us to think in new ways about American competitiveness. It needs us to embrace the fact that we're preparing students to take their place in the world, not necessarily in a particular state or a particular region, and those present significant challenges. For me, I think the questions, the framing of the questions and the challenges is quite simple. Obviously, dealing with the solutions is more challenging. We start with an assumption. Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful tool we can use to change the world." I have to believe that everyone in this room would adopt that exception or that assumption and seek to advance it. The challenge and the goal, enhancing prosperity and personal freedom, the creation of fulfilling lives, equity, and peace around the globe. That is the work of today's educators. And so the strategies that we pursue include to collaborate successfully, to create data-driven interventions which achieve results because they are focused on the first 1,000 days of a child's life, because they recognize that quality teachers, when allowed to be leaders in schools, are the single most important differentiator between success and something less than success. A holistic approach that recognizes the need to address all factors in a child's life in order for them to succeed academically. So a student-focused, teacher-led, community-connected paradigm is what we have to create, with the result being a prepared workforce with sustainable pathways to prosperity and careers, not just jobs for young people. Expanded economic opportunity that embraces global competitiveness. Personal fulfillment, successful lives are what we would create if we were achieving successful results. And finally, we would find sustainable self-government capable of allowing us to make the choices that are necessary in a diverse society. I believe that with your commitment to meaningful collaboration and with a recognition of the challenges that we face, each of us have the opportunity to contribute to the choices that will shape the future. And I'm hopeful that as you think about these solutions, you'll embrace the findings of a storybook that Nell enjoyed me reading to her as a young child, Stone Soup. 3 soldiers came into a town, and everyone there immediately hid what they had. In some cases, it was carrots. In a few cases, it was cabbage. In a few cases, it was a scrap of meat. 3 soldiers said, "We're going to put a pot in the middle of town, and we're going to make the most beautiful soup, but we're going to make it from these 3 stones." They put the pot to boil and put the 3 stones in, and fairly soon, neighbors who'd heard of this came forward and said, "You know what? That beautiful soup would be made more beautiful if I could put some of my carrots in it." And somebody else came and said, "I'd like to put some of my cabbages in that soup. It would make it even better." And so when you see opportunities, not through a lens of scarcity, but through a lens of abundance, when you recognize the progress that has been made, even in a short period of time, the sails can be full. We can be enthusiastic about the progress yet to be made, realistic in the challenges, but I believe that you are among the most privileged citizens of the most privileged nation on earth. And because of your unique gifts, you have the chance, through what you do, the policies you create, the students you teach, the proposals that you vet and enact, to impact the lives of students, and to do it in a way that prepares them to take full advantage of their place as an American, to embrace freedoms, and ultimately to reflect that highest calling of our nation, to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as an empowered citizen of the globe. I wish you so very much good luck in all of that. I know that your commitment to be here and to work with the Education Commission of the States reflects your passion for making a difference. And for that, on behalf of my own daughter, in memory of my grandmother, those who made a difference for her, that set in place a trajectory for my own success, it's just amazing to think, what can the future hold? And I know it will be a brighter future because all of you are committed to the common good. Thank you all.